Hello and welcome. The turmoil that began with the United States winding down its 20-year presence in Afghanistan continues at this point. Remember, they were actually supposed to leave on the 30th of August, but as we hear, there are still many Americans and, for that matter, even many other nationals still stuck in Afghanistan. But more importantly, as the Taliban has taken over Afghanistan and is about to install a government, there are big questions about what this means for the region, and more importantly, from an India point of view, what have we been doing or should we be doing to ensure that our interests or self-interests are protected. So let's try and understand this issue in terms of both some historical context as well as some present and future context. To do that, I'm joined by Dr. Shanthie Mariet D'Souza, founding professor at the Kautilya School of Public Policy at GITAM University in Hyderabad. She's also founder and president of think tank Mantraya. Her recent work includes countering insurgencies and violent extremism in South and Southeast Asia, Afghanistan in transition, and saving Afghanistan. She has a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University or JNU in international relations and American studies. Thank you very much for joining me, Dr. D'Souza. So, first question to you: why should India worry about Afghanistan at this point?
Well, I think Afghanistan is an important area of concern in terms of security, because the fact that there's a complete capture of power by Taliban and its linkages with international terrorist groups and anti-India groups is a major concern. Secondly, there is also concern about how Taliban will look at the Kashmir issue, though they have made contradictory statements, but we can't go from there. And more importantly, the space which anti-India groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed will once again find in Afghanistan will be worrisome for India. The second is in terms of the economic interest and India's Central Asia Connect policy, whereby Afghanistan sits at a critical juncture connecting India to Central Asia. So that would come under area of concern, and that's the second in terms of economy. And thirdly, also in terms of the political dynamics and the regional power play. So what's happening there has been a strategic game over for India in many ways, and also a strategic sphere in which China and Pakistan seem to be on ascendance. And given the fact that there is going to be Chinese present in addition to the Pakistani influence out there, that would put considerable strategic pressure on India from the Western partners.
Right. So let me try and put the same question a little historically. So how engaged have we been as India with Afghanistan before 2000, before the Americans came and before the Taliban were removed because they were harboring bin Laden and America wanted to attack? So what was happening before that, and what has changed since then?
Well, before that, as you know, India and Afghanistan had long traditional civilizational relationship, and that has been seen in various forms in the literature, from Kabuliwala to what we have images about Afghans in India. But the fact is that during the 1960s and 70s, there was very close relationship, particularly during Indira Gandhi's time, where President Dawood would actually consult Indira Gandhi, and that alliance was very important for India because it was a counterpoint towards Pakistan. And also the fact that during the Soviet intervention, India actually did not take a position favoring the Afghans, and that was one of the letdowns at that period of time. But India did try to bridge the gap, and India has been a home to a lot of political elite who left Afghanistan, be it from Rajibullah's time to later on. So India has been a natural home. So there is a natural connect, there is a civilizational connect, there's also a cultural connect. And that has helped India and Afghanistan maintain its ties despite the break in linkages that came when Taliban captured power in 1996. But thereafter, again, India re-established its ties, and there's considerable amount of goodwill and connect with India in Afghanistan now.
Right, and the Taliban re-established power after taking it back from Soviet Russia, who had attacked Afghanistan earlier. So now, if we are to continue to remain engaged with Afghanistan, what will it take? And I'm going to come to the question on whether we can do it a little later. What will it take at this point, and how would we do it?
Well, I think immediately India will have to engage the Taliban at certain level, more out of need of pragmatism and necessity, because we also need to look at the possibility of keeping the embassy open, having our projects running there, and also evacuation of those Afghan nationals who had helped India in various forms. So there is an immediate need, be in terms of helping the Afghans and also averting a humanitarian crisis there. But that engagement did not translate into recognition, and that's the distinction India needs to make. Because India, in the last 2 decades, has considerable influence in Afghanistan among most of the major ethnic groups. And if you have seen the developments as they have been evolving, uh, Vice President Abdullah Saleh, who was taken up the resistance in Panjshir, actually needed India's support and help, and that was not very forthcoming. So I think the problem with India's policy has been to put all eggs in one basket and to be working under the US-led security assurances and umbrella, whereby India has been left in the lurch. So immediately, I think India should look at engaging Afghans at a certain level, especially the women's groups who are still there and who have been a major proponent of Indian projects. Secondly, is to engage Afghans to carry out these projects as they are, especially the small scale projects. And that's what we can do inside Afghanistan given the constraints India faces now. But India could do more in terms of regional alliances. Iran has been making calls in terms of evoking international law, looking at areas and calling for election inside Afghanistan. Likewise, Russia is also making some moves of that sort. It's for India to pick up these moves and progress. And I
Right.
think more importantly, with the seat India had in the UN Security Council, India could have done much more, and that was more immediate in terms of the sanctions regime and also in terms of the humanitarian response.
Right. So, would you say, therefore, that the China factor is the one thing that significantly changed before 2000 to now?
China had maintained its contacts with the Taliban, but it didn't play a significant role because it was more interested in the economic interest in Afghanistan, in addition to concerns of radicalization, which would have affected its province of Xinjiang. But having said that, I think China has moved in largely because it has economic interest now, and given the fact that it had maintained contacts with the Taliban right from 1990s onwards, has helped it gain some leverage there. Also, with its all-weather friend Pakistan, there is a kind of alliance which is developed, which will help China move ahead with the CPEC and OBOR.
Right.
And if you see the statements which are coming from the Taliban in favor of China, I think China is going to play an important role, but not necessarily a role that Americans had.
Right. So, if as we try and look ahead, how does this all fit with our foreign policy pre the American withdrawal, and what changes would we bring about, or would we need to bring about to accommodate this new equation?
Well, in terms of the foreign policy, I don't see much change. There has been more of continuity rather than change. So broadly, India went in 2001 in that limited space that was available and started with humanitarian projects and worked on a soft power approach and channelized and accrued a lot of goodwill inside Afghanistan, which worked very well till now. But fundamental reality is India functioned under the US security umbrella. And as there were calls for exit by the US right from President Obama in 2014 till now, India was not really prepared for this scenario, and which should have been on the drawing board because you did know that this scenario would evolve one day, and how would you deal with it as it evolved. So we completely caught on a back foot and generally followed a wait and watch policy, which was more of a policy paralysis rather than actually acting. And therein, I think India lost considerable amount of leverage it had in Afghanistan. Right from, if you look at the security sector, India could have definitely done more than training the Afghans. I think they needed more advice on how to conduct counterinsurgency operations. If you look at the political sector, again, there were always problems of elections and the contested elections added to the crisis of political legitimacy in Afghanistan. I think India could have played a much larger role in terms of the political transition and peace process. And lastly, and more importantly, in the economic sector, where India did considerable investment, it could have been more useful for India to look at small and medium enterprises and build that Afghan capacity and revenue to sustain their own economy. So, and from now on, with the capture of power by Taliban, I think our options are very limited, and we're still doing the wait and watch policy, where I would say that we would need to look at more actors on the ground who are willing to engage India and pick up those actors and channelize them into a forum where they do get a leverage and platform to put up their interest. And more importantly, it's like women's groups and those youth groups who are taking on to demonstrations, and also looking at regional actors who would partner with India and maybe other democratic countries. I mean, I think there are a lot of options, but India needs to look beyond the US prism and also needs to move beyond its wait and watch policy.
Right. And when you look at Taliban today, and many people have used the word Taliban 2.0. So, and you talked about in the beginning, the concerns for India, particularly terror networks and the connections thereof. So, do you think Taliban 2.0, if one can call it that, is going to be different in any way, or would we be, assuming too much and too soon? And if it is different, then how could that difference be of any help to us?
Well, it's different in the way it's been structured, because initially the Taliban was a monolith organization under Mullah Omar, but now we do see a lot of differences and internal divisions within Taliban. It's not a monolithic organization. It also has Haqqani network, which is a very important component, in addition to Al-Qaeda and other groups. So how is it going to function, and how would it actually impinge on India's interests would be interesting, because there are certain segments of the Taliban who are amenable to working with India. And they have been sending those feelers for a considerable amount of time, but India didn't actually channelize on them. But now to reach out to the leadership and to recognize them would be actually jumping the gun, in the sense of, going preemptive without really knowing about the nature of the regime you're going to deal with. So that would be really a wild card. So I think India has to now look at how the Taliban is forming the government and try to make it more inclusive as possible, because they did make all this initial outreach attempts and try to project a very moderate pace. So as long as it's inclusive and has other leaders involved in some form, and gradually look for areas where you can dilute the extremist agenda, then you would have a workable situation. But if it's a totalitarian group, or if the Haqqani network has a precedence, then I think our choices are very limited. So inside Afghanistan, there are players and there are various people who are amenable to India. So it is to tap on those people and build that network.
Right. Last question. You've done a lot of field work in Afghanistan. So what's the one, if you have a memory that that you have, which perhaps gives you some hope of what lies ahead, or optimism for the future?
Well, I think in one of my travels to Kandahar province, I'd gone to this village in Argandab, and I met a few of these community elders, and some of them are closely aligned even to the Taliban groups. But interestingly, they came out with this idea that they want their girl child to be educated. They want them to be dentists. Because at that point, when I visited Kandahar, it was around 2011 when India had signed the strategic partnership agreement. That was the day I was there. I was doing this interview. So they wanted more of girl child education. They wanted women dentists in Kandahar. And they wanted more of modernization, more of economic benefits. And these are people who were aligned to the Taliban, in a way. So I think that's a positive sign. But personally, I think it's also about women. It was meeting those women provincial councillors in Kandahar and Nangarhar province, and the hope and the dreams they had for their country. And I think women are long been the stakeholders for peace and stability in Afghanistan. So I see those as positive image, in addition to a lot of young people. And with the demographic dividend Afghanistan had, I think those were the positive images of seeing those girl children go to school, young people go to colleges and go to offices. And even one of the interview I did with Maulvi Kalamuddin, who was the deputy vice chief of the Taliban who had surrendered, he also was quite open to seeing these changes. But for me, it would be interesting to see now that they're captured power, how much would that translate into action?
Right. Dr. Shanthie D'Souza, thank you so much for joining me, and do hope to speak to you again on this issue.
Thank you so much.